Rena, negativity. Um, Negativity and the negativity bias. Um, Negativity is so much on my mind that I don't care how you are. I didn't ask how you are. That's how much negativity is on my mind. Okay, so organic intelligence makes a big deal of negativity and the negativity bias. It offers that as maybe the central problem that we're trying to get away from biologically. And I was curious in exploring what exactly is negativity and the negativity bias, free associating in myself right now. In in glaring and extreme cases, it's very clear. You have someone always anxious, always negative. Every thought is dark and negative. They only see problems everywhere. There's never a positive thought. So in very clear extreme cases, there's no problem understanding what negativity is and this bias towards negative thinking, negative focus. When you get to the less just super clear garden extreme cases, I get more curious. And I remember in some conversations we've had, we're talking and I say, "Oh, sorry, I'm a little bit distracted. That's my negativity bias, or what's wrong attention," which OI calls the negativity bias the what's wrong attention. And then a few times you had said, "Oh, but the problem you're focused on is a real problem you're having in life." Like, for example, if I'm sick and fatigued, and I say, "Sorry, Rena, I'm a bit fatigued. My attention's on my fatigue. That's my what's wrong attention." You might say, "But you are fatigued. That's a real problem. So it's not negativity bias or what's wrong attention." And I remember, do I agree with Rena? Do I disagree with what is that about? And even if there is a real problem, couldn't there still be a tension that's the negativity bias? So, wow, okay, I'm gonna stop and let you take the baton, and that's how I began. Sorry.
Okay, all right. Love just diving right in, right? And I think there's a certain level we want to look at negativity. Are we calling that a problem? Is that something because I think the example that you gave, we're trying to figure out, well, you're kind of suggesting that, oh, my attention's on my fatigue, and that's really not where it should be. Like that's a negative thing that I have my attention on my fatigue. Um, and I think, some of those things I might go and maybe not like to notice your fatigue and that's a thing and maybe you want to do something about it. That's not something that is going to lead you in a harmful way. It's going to lead you possibly in a way that's self-enhancing, right? To find ways um, to deal with whatever you're having with, right? So
Um,
we start getting into these issues around denial and is in organic intelligence, yes, we talk about the what's wrong attention, and we're trying to maybe see if we can shift our attentional focus differently at times. But is that necessarily in and of itself just a problem? The fact that we have thoughts that are less than positive in any given moment.
okay, I think so. One thing you're saying is often we're focused on a problem or what's wrong or what's negative, and that focus is beneficial because we might find a solution. I want to cure cancer. I want to find a partner. I want to get out of poverty. I want to improve my health. And so those would not be the cases of negativity that we're trying to get away from. That's just trying to you're identifying some area for the where you can benefit yourself and going for it, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So what would be negativity in this sense, in this context? I mean, I'm lonely, want a girlfriend, I'm suffering a lot, my thoughts go there a lot. That seems like something in organic intelligence, depending on the context and certain details, would be called a negativity bias, or the attention keeps going to what's negative. Yeah.
Yeah, so like in that there's a where the attention keeps going to something and it's kind of like circling the drain, right? Like it just keeps going around that issue, which is very different than, hey, I'd really like a boyfriend or a girlfriend, how can I go about doing this? And you begin to find ways to take some kind of action, right? So those are two very different scenarios. One is kind of a problem solving scenario, and the other one is just reiterating over and over, in a way that doesn't help one come out of whatever state that they're in.
Fixated thoughts, circling the drain.
Mhm.
Yeah. I'm wondering whether there could be a circling the drain with positive thoughts, in which case that wouldn't be essential to negativity, right? And
Yeah, I think, I use that phrase circling the drain. I'm now questioning whether to bring this up. Let's go
yeah,
backwards for a second.
yeah, free associate, yeah.
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 So when we say the negativity bias, that's actually a phrase I think, if I'm right, Rick Hansen coined. I think he put it in The Buddha Brain was the name of the book. And he was talking about the way the brain is structured is that there's a tendency to notice what's wrong faster than noticing what's okay, right? That the brain has the way it's structured and the way pathways are structured means that it's more, and he explains that evolutionarily it's more important to notice a problem and do something about it than to not notice something that's not wrong. In other words, he's talking about type 1 and type 2 errors, right? Like, so it's more important that if a lion's going to come to eat you, that you don't think that the sound that you're hearing is just rustling in the grass. Like, you want to assume that the rustling in the grass is going to be a lion as opposed to, your kid coming through the savannah. And so there's a tendency, he's saying, if I understand it right, that we are programmed in a sense to be more easily able to see what is negative than what is either neutral or positive. So that's what he talks about, the what's wrong, or the negativity bias. Like you said, Steve in Organic Intelligence has named that the what's wrong attention, which I like that because that has, when we talk about attention, there's something around being deliberate about that and that we have choice about that. And so that we can actually choose the direction of our attention. Do we have it on constantly or continuously on a regular basis on the what's wrong things in life, which kind of can keep us stuck? Or are we in a place where we're noticing on a regular basis things that are neutral, things that are okay, things that are positive, which then allows the way we go about life to not be stuck in that, that constant, like I said, the circling the drain, the recursive thinking around things that are unpleasant.
There's hmm, hmm. I don't want to just rush into saying something before I even know. I'm suspicious of there seems to when people discuss negativity and negativity bias, and when cognitive behavioral therapists give examples like work review, and your manager says 9 positive things, 1 negative thing, and you focus on the negative thing and you ignore the positive things, I have a feeling where I'm going is going to be so alien. But I'm suspicious of the idea that things out there in the world are pre-tagged as negative, positive, or neutral, or intrinsically negative, positive, or neutral. It's just out there like Hollywood signs above everything that you see. And then the cognitive behavioral therapist says, okay, you have to like, that one's positive, that one's neutral, that one's negative, and then you've got to make sure that you've identified them correctly. And then if there are 9 positives and 1 negative, you better know that there are 9 positives. And that struck me as really a fundamentally wrong or questionable approach, as if the idea that negativity, positivity, and neutrality are out there independent of their relationship to your organism strikes me as wrong.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I would agree with that because
Yeah.
you're right that intrinsically, the tree out there is neither good, bad, or indifferent, right? Like they're it's very difficult to name things in terms of negative or positive or neutral without recognizing how is that like impacting me? Because whether we see it as negative or positive or neutral has to do with our own biology.
Yeah. So the negativity bias, as you explained it, as as you interpret it from Hansen, which you attributed to him, and I know that we're at sea with Google checking, but um, the idea is we're programmed, our brains are our attention notices threats more quickly because that's really important, right? And then that concept of negativity bias may be used to explain why we focus on the one negative comment from the manager as opposed to the nine positive ones, right?
Right.
One question I have is, I fear it's academic, but it's in my mind right now. Why then why is it called a bias? Bias seems to imply it's not good or should be corrected or it's an error. But if that's just how the brain is wired, why would it be a bias? Oh man, Rena, can I just pile on some more stuff here? And I'm scared, but I'm going to do it. Jake Steiner, the end myopia guy who works with people to improve their vision naturally. He, I had this aha moment or this shock moment or intense moment when he said it's normal for one eye to be stronger than the other eye, to see better than the other eye. And he was questioning the assumption that both eyes should be have the same level of vision, and so optometrists will try to correct for that. But he's saying no, that's normal. Just like it's normal for one hand to be stronger, right-handed, left-handed. One hand is dominant, and that was like, wow, yeah, I was uncritically assuming that normally or ideally both eyes should have the same. God, I have no idea where I'm going, Rena. I'm sorry. Both eyes should have the same level of vision. It's something's wrong if one eye is stronger. And then Steiner comes in and says, no, 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 that's normal. And then I got into thinking, how do we know what's normal? Like both eyes the same or one eye stronger? And somehow this I'm getting back to negativity bias saying if we're wired to spot threats more quickly, why would that be a bias as opposed to just normal, which gets
Right.
into questions of what is normal here, but kind of all
Yeah.
over the place. Thank you for
Yeah. So and we, I don't have a dictionary to look up bias. To me, bias just means more tendency. There's a tendency towards one thing over another thing, not whether that tendency is good or bad. So with negativity bias, it's the tendency for the brain to notice threat before it notices neutral or positive. And that tendency is a little bit something that the brain, we just inherit evolutionarily in terms of our brains. And that doesn't mean that we can look at, we don't have to label that good or bad or anything. It's just what is. It's just where the brain tends to go. And if the brain goes there repeatedly over and over and over again, that's going to keep the biology from being able to grow. Because one of the reasons that the brain would do that and why our organism would do that is to keep stable enough, right? So if we don't change anything, and growth requires change, if we don't change anything, everything can seem like it's stable. And the biology likes obviously stable. But if it keeps doing that pattern over and over and over again, then we're going to experience that as limiting our ability to grow. So
yeah,
to me, the negativity by like yes, we want to see threat where there is actually threat in reality. And we want to see that very quickly. And we want our biology to respond to that without our having to think about it. So we want that to happen. But in terms of growth, that tendency to only to focus on what's negative can keep the biology from growing.
yes, kind of letting that ping pong around. I get the I get that growth requires getting out of negativity or negativity bias. I get that in the abstract, and I'm wondering how to understand what counts as excess negativity or not. Yeah. Um,
Yeah, because
yeah.
really, yeah, what is excess? I mean, there,
And can I just
yeah,
interrupt really
but
really quickly, and then I'm also suspicious. I know that in the world of therapy, especially the somatic world, the nervous system world, the word and concept threat comes up a lot. Threat, threat, threat. We're looking for threat, and I am sometimes suspicious of how that's used. And usually it's used in the context of immediate threat to survival. The lion's coming at you, but in our lives, that's almost never the case. So it's but yet if your partner or a friend is coming at you with a lot of anger, in some sense that is a threat, even though your life is not at all in danger. So there's curiosity in my mind about how to understand threat in this context also.
mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
good question.
Yeah.
I had a thought, right, that came to me about an experience just the other day, in a group, one of the groups that I lead. And in the group, there was just some conversation about, how the past couple weeks have been, and especially because there was, the solstice and holiday time, and so just an exploration of that, and different people were mentioning insights that they had had that felt really good to them. They felt what we would call positive, right? And they were sharing that, and one of the persons, that person was saying, "Oh, I'm not too sure I have something positive to say." Right? My couple weeks were really challenging, and challenging with health or family or weather. Things just weren't going well, right? And so there's these challenges that were being experienced, and so the person didn't feel as if at first they could, they had anything quote unquote positive to share. And yet that person made a comment that as the person was sharing, then there arose this, oh, but the interesting thing here is that I don't feel jealousy of these other people. These other people are sharing positive things. I don't have anything positive to share. But oh, come to think of that, that's actually positive because I can see that I'm not jealous of these other people and what they're sharing, right? And so what to me was interesting is how there was this natural oscillation that happened. And I know this person. I know this person has been working quite a bit on allowing their biology to grow and shift. And so in this case, that person had enough organization on board that they could say, "Oh, this didn't seem positive. I didn't want to share anything." And oh, and the biology automatically did that shift of, but this is good because I'm not jealous of these other people sharing, right? And so that biology did its own shift from what we would say is what's wrong, right? To, oh, but this is what's right or this is what's good. And that happened for that person automatically because that person is not circling the drain over and
Uh,
over and over, living in the what's wrong attention or living in that negativity bias. That person has already trained themselves to see neutral, to see positive, and has done that enough that the biology does its own oscillations from quote unquote negative to quote unquote positive.
yeah. Okay. So to the degree orientation and pleasure are stabilized in the biology, the cycles of intensity and de-intensification in the biology will be optimal. And to that degree, there will be, and one manifestation of that will be positive thoughts and negative thoughts often oscillating in a way that is part of just living and growing over time. Right. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
There's this idea. I I'm I'm suddenly self-conscious about the viewers, whoever will be viewing this, and if I come across as someone who's constantly questioning and never coming into answers, um, from the philosophy of objectivism, I think a lot of objectivists, if they were watching me or this, they would say it's not about being positive or negative, but objective about identifying what is. So if your partner's cheating on you, that's a truth. It's maybe it's negative, but the point is to identify what's true. If she's not or he's not, then that I'm tired of opening up cans of worms I don't know what to do with. But there's this idea that can come from that that thinking in terms of positive and negative is somehow non-fundamental, non-primary, and there needs to be an additional concept of just we're trying to be accurate in our relationship to reality, in seeking knowledge and in reasoning and assessing things. I'm wondering how that relates to what we're talking about, anorganic intelligence.
Yeah, a couple things flashed through my mind just from our conversation. Like you talked about the idea of a threat, what is really a threat, what is not a threat. And there is a level to which to be able to be objective allows us to see reality without getting stuck. And stuck can be stuck in negativity or it can be stuck in positivity, right? So a Pollyannish approach or denial, by trying to use positive thinking or whatnot is not actually objective either. So when we talk about negativity, the negativity bias, trying to shift our attention, we're trying to actually shift our attention into what is more objective. And what is very objective is most of the time in the world, life is actually fairly neutral. So if we just look at this exact moment from where I'm sitting, from where you're sitting, and what's happening around you, doesn't mean, there isn't things happening in the rest of the world that is problematic for some people. But right now, in this moment, my immediate environment is neutral. And one could even say safe. And I can even say it's positive because I'm enjoying this conversation.
Mm.
If, however, in this moment, all I can think about is the news that I read or the fact that my retirement account is not growing as fast as it should grow, or, what am I going to do about my health? And, am I going to be able to get old or not get old? And do I need, like I could
Oh.
ruminate on all of those things, and that's not going to help me because the reality is in this moment, things are fairly neutral. That's objective.
Not interesting and all right. I'm in a business meeting and there are no tigers in the room waiting to attack me. And a coworker insults me in the meeting and I get hurt and angry. All right. I think some inorganic intelligence would say my response was oriented. I was responding as opposed to being checked out or maybe numb or I don't know, dissociated. I don't know. But someone insults me, I'm offended, hurt, and that would be some would say that would be oriented because my system is responding to the here and now, to the environment. I was insulted. At the same time, there are no tigers in the room, so I'm totally physically safe. Would that be an example of objectivity? Would that be an example of negativity bias? Because more optimally, I would just not be as triggered, if I may. There was a context in which someone was challenging the founder, Steve, saying, "What you're all about fighting the negativity bias, but what if that's just not possible? What if you're just in a terrible life situation? Is it really possible to organize your biology to feel the neutrality of orientation if life is just so horrific?" And then the reply was, yes, look into logotherapy, the people in the concentration camps, Yalom. I mean, and Eastern sages saying you can grow, you can wisen in a way that no matter the vicissitudes, you can have equanimity. Compare that to this example of business meeting, coworker insults me, I am offended, and someone calls that proper orientation. So
Right.
yeah.
Because in a moment, like emotions, the Buddhists like to say they're like clouds. They just float through and they're just floating through the sky. That things happen, your biology responds. The biology is going to respond based on a whole bunch of past conditioning. So if a person insults you, you know, your conditioning might be such that you turn it around and make a joke about it. Your conditioning might be, oh, immediately you have to say something and top that person. And so you do that, right? Like there's all these ways that, the images that show up, the body sensations that show up, the affect, which I think is actually body sensations just in awareness, what
Oh,
thoughts come into your mind, all of that's going to happen in a split second. And those things we don't actually have control over them. The question is, once that's shown up, once you feel the hurt, once you feel the anger, well, and that I would say is oriented because something happened and something your body had a response. The question becomes, well, now that you're thinking about this, what are you going to do about it? And so bringing thought and bringing some rational thought into this situation is useful and helpful, regardless of whether it's negative or not, right? And even if you are oriented, at some point you have to decide, am I going to respond? Am I going to go complain to HR? Am I going to go have a conversation with that person? Am I just going to ignore it? Am I like, there's just an umpteen dozen different possibilities of response. And that involves our meaning channel, the thought channel, to think, well, how do I want to respond to the situation? And if the system is trapped in the what's wrong attention, it's only going to see options to that are going to accelerate the intensity. So your own intensity, if it's rising and it's super high, depending on your conditioning at this point, if your intensity is super high, you might do something that actually increases the intensity. You might
yeah,
show up at that person's office and start berating that person and how dare you do that kind of thing. And you do that in public and everybody hears. And now the whole office is involved in this kind of situation. And so it's possible to raise the level of intensity, which isn't going to be helpful for anybody, yourself included. The other possibility would be like, okay, that happened. And, you know, it didn't really hurt me. I mean, I felt hurt, but ultimately I can just turn around and ignore the situation and move on. And you might choose to do that because it's not going to have that much of a negative consequence. If the person said something, say in front of the boss, makes you look bad, the boss is then going to see you in a negative light, and now your job is a threat, well, then that would be a whole nother situation. So it all depends again on the context, but whatever's happening in that moment is going to be, you're going to have an immediate biological response. And then we can pause, we can go, okay, and from here, what's going to lower my intensity? What's going to raise my intensity?
yeah,
And that's a possibility. And the more we've are like you mentioned earlier, the biology's become more stabilized in orientation and pleasure, the more likely that in that instance, the level of arousal will be very minimal. The more the system is in the what's wrong attention, as soon as you hear that, you're going to be like, the level of intensity is going to rise really high, and you're going to have a stronger reaction or response to it. And so the more we organize our systems, the less we're trapped in the what's wrong, circle, the more likely we're not going to foster or fuel greater intensity levels in response to things that happen to us, positive or negative.
yikes. We're out of time, but I thought, thank you. Just to throw in, and there's a situation where as you increase in capacity, you're able now to discover what's wrong. So the appearance of negativity, in some sense, could be a sign of growth, actually. But we don't have time to even touch on that for that. Sorry. Okay, but to end on that, um, thank you, Rena, for the wild ride as usual. Any last thoughts from you before we say ciao for now and see each other next week?
I appreciate the topic. You brought up the very end, something I think that's important. And
Yes.
again, we keep coming at this. It depends. It depends on the person's biology. It depends on the situation, what's happening, right? There's a lot of these depend scenarios, and so it's helpful to look at these so that people don't get stuck in thinking things are one way and not another. The more inclusive we can be about our life experiences, I think the better it is for us.
Inclusive about The more inclusive we can be about our life experiences, the better for us.